April is Stress Awareness Month and we're bringing in the experts to help out with yours. Why is it that the more you have to get done, the harder it is to actually start? It is known as overwhelm freeze, and it can really impact your productivity and your mental health, but it's also something you can overcome. CAROLYN YAFFE is with us this afternoon. She's a psychotherapist from Medcare. And this is something that I am definitely affected by, CAROLYN. Sometimes it's easier just to do nothing than to try and do something. How are you?
Hi, Helen, how are you?
I'm all right, a little stressed.
Great. Yeah, no, as we all are.
Not going to lie. It's interesting because I've had an awful lot of new doctors on the show recently, new to Dubai, I mean. And I'm always quite interested to get their take and say, like, what are you noticing with patients, whether it is a family doctor, someone who works in the mental health space such as yourself, and so many people saying, this is a stress city. We're seeing an awful lot of burnout. And I wondered if that's true of what you're seeing coming into clinic there at Medcare.
Oh, well, I mean, I think that's actually universal.
Do you?
I mean, I think, I think stress and, what we're going to speak about, the overwhelm freezes, is definitely universal. And I think that it is extremely common in, not only professional environments, but also in your personal life.
Definitely. This is a busy, dynamic city. We're living in a busy, dynamic time where, we've got so many things competing for our attention. And it feels like sometimes the to-do list is never ending with, yes, as you say, sometimes, personal things, professional things in the home, trying to keep on top of friendships and relationships. Then we've got this pressure of trying to, look a certain way, and then self-care and, but you should be meditating as well. And that feels like something like a chore. It feels, the word we're using here is overwhelming. I wanted to ask you, CAROLYN, a little bit about how are stress and overwhelm freeze related? Are you able to explain a little bit about what happens in the brain?
Yeah, sure. So stress and overwhelm freeze are actually closely related. And as we all know, stress is a normal response to our everyday challenges and the everyday demands of life. But when it gets to a level where it is so overwhelming, it can literally lead to a state of what we call overwhelm freeze. So with that said, when the brain perceives a situation as stressful or scary, the brain kind of feels like it's a danger situation. So it can trigger the flight or fight response, but it also can trigger the freeze response. Mm-hmm. So when the stress becomes very overwhelming, it can lead to literally like a feeling of paralysis.
That's interesting, because I've just had a message here from Jean saying, is this like task paralysis? So is that
yes,
another description? Okay, interesting.
Exactly. That's another term for it, is task paralysis.
Tell us a little bit about what someone might experience, and if you're able to give us some examples, that would be really, really helpful. So we can relate, because I'm already getting messages on this.
Oh no, okay, that's great. People can actually you can start to feel disconnected, like disconnected from your body. You are unable to focus. You can feel completely out of control. You find it virtually impossible to make decisions. You're feeling stuck. And sometimes you are so overwhelmed and you have that feeling of actually feeling paralyzed. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean physically paralyzed. I mean, like emotionally paralyzed, that you can't even get the words out to ask for help.
So it can lead to total inaction and total powerlessness. Okay, now I'm going to go to the text line and see if we can help out MK, Carolyn, who's been in touch, saying, my 15-year-old daughter really suffers from this in class. She was assessed for ADHD as she kind of shuts down when a teacher gives instructions and then can't complete the task. She doesn't have ADHD and we've moved her into some smaller class settings, which is helping. But any advice as the academic pressure increases this term? Great question, MK. I'm sure you are not alone in terms of the pressures on teens, and amazing that you're getting this help. So what's your take, Carolyn?
Yeah, I mean, that is an excellent question, because overwhelm freeze just doesn't affect adults. I mean, it's also very common in young people. And adolescents usually experience stressors such as academic pressure, peer pressure, social media, family conflict, physical changes. And when these stressors become overwhelming, they too can experience that state of freeze. Mm-hmm. And it makes it very challenging to cope with their feelings and to actually move forward. So what I advise is it's very important that parents and educators are aware and that they help these young people cope with the stress and feeling overwhelmed by really providing them a supportive environment that encourages open communication, positive coping strategies, and helping them practice self-care.
Mm-hmm. And as she's saying there, or he, MK, academic pressure increasing as we move into kind of exam season as well.
Exactly.
Any good tips for students?
Well, I think it's important to teach young people coping mechanisms, and such as deep breathing, or have them do yoga or exercise or meditation, anything that can help manage stress and promote relaxation. Another thing that I recommend is students also, often they get into this very competitive thing academically, and that actually just even increases their pressure. And, it's very important for their teachers and educators and their parents to really help them cope with that, and to help them balance studying and break time and time for activities, because these kids, they'll go and they'll revise for
the burnout is real. It really is. And, so there are some very, very competitive academic environments, as you say, globally, but here as well.
Yeah, I get it. No, absolutely here. But I think it's really important. And sometimes that pressure comes from parents. And I think that it's extremely important for parents to be mindful of the negative consequences of placing increased pressure on their children regarding academics and, regarding the competitiveness with their peers. I think it's extremely important that they are very mindful of this.
Couldn't have put it better myself. What about us as adults? We've only got a couple of minutes left, Carolyn, but I wanted to ask you, if anyone is listening to this going, my to-do list makes you want to vomit, and I've got family pressures and professional pressures and all of these things. You mentioned there, some things that, perhaps we've heard of, but we don't necessarily do. So, deep breathing, mindfulness. What about some quick tips in the moment when that sense of overwhelm is just too much?
I know that. Okay. What I suggest is preventative. Try to break large tasks into smaller ones. So you're not overwhelmed in the first place. So be proactive.
For me, whenever I start to feel overwhelmed, and this happens quite a lot, I kind of spin out a bit. Making a list makes a massive difference, and it sounds so silly. But if I've got this kind of intangible, abstract, I've got to do this, and I've got to do this, and I've got to do that tomorrow morning, and then if I get that done, then I can tell him to do. But if I actually write it down, it stops me catastrophizing, and it actually makes it a little bit more manageable. And it sounds so basic, and I judge myself for not having done that earlier in the process. But I'm like, actually, it's not as bad as I thought, and I can do that in the 5 minutes, and I can do that straight away.
Exactly. So because when you see it written out, it doesn't look as big as it may feel in your brain.
Mm-hmm. Too right.
Does that make sense?
It totally does.
Yeah.
CAROLYN, thank you so much. I'm so sorry we've run out of time. But if anyone wants to contact you, or is there any recommended reading that you think would be quite useful? I'd love to get your contact details, and indeed anything for anyone that wants to read into this a little bit more, or listen, of course.
Okay, sure. Well, what I think that people really should do is that they should really read about self-care. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that is incredibly important because, again, self-care is being proactive.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to do some breathing.
Yeah. Sorry.
Breathing in a bath. Thank you so much, CAROLYN.
Can I just mention one thing very quickly, because I think this also may be helpful. I think if people find themselves in this situation very often, it may be worth it to have an assessment. They may have ADHD that they don't even know that they have, or any kind of processing issue. And I think it's very important to, get that out of the way.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, absolutely. Good diagnosis, so you know what you're dealing with. And thank you so much, CAROLYN. Really, really do appreciate your time. CAROLYN, YAFFE psychotherapist, speaking to us from Medcare.